Hello and welcome, dear learners of IGNOU, for the course of DCE Diploma in Creative Writing in English. I am your lecturer and counselor Kiran Misra, and today I'll be talking about the anti-plot. I told you earlier that the three essential elements of a narrative are setting, character and plot. But where we have the conventional plot, we also have something called the anti-plot. Now, before I tell you what an anti-plot is, I guess you are all familiar with the conventional narrative which has the arch plot, and that is what most stories will fall into. This is a classic plot, the hero's journey, the quest story. And even if your protagonist or your hero isn't setting off to destroy the ring or kill the demon, they have a goal they are striving to accomplish by the end of the story. And the same basic beats exist story to story. And then within that narrative and the arch plot, you have the mini plot, which focuses much more on internal conflicts. In fact, you can have many mini plots or subplots. And typically, bottle episodes fall under the category of a mini plot. What is a bottle episode? It's an episode of a television show that is written in such a way that it requires only one set or scene and is with a limited number of cast members. So it's a subplot of the larger serial. Now, for most writers, the arch plot is your go-to story. There's an occasional mini plot or subplot thrown in here and there on the literary end. And then breaking away from all this is the anti-plot. The anti-plot throws away all the rules of storytelling. The narrative can be fractured, reality and time up in the air, and the protagonist doesn't change. Well, actually it's postmodernism at its finest. You know, anti-plots are a lot like social commentaries, almost bordering on a documentary. They are most effectively used to tell tales that people cannot justify with the traditional story form. The Holocaust, World Wars, Pearl Harbors, riots, and the Kashmir genocide, all of those terrible but wholly interesting historical events. So, coming further on to telling you what is an anti-plot. It's a name given to a story that, well, isn't a story. And how is that not a story? Because there are no requirements or selling points that must exist to make it one. It's creativity's version of a free-for-all. There are two types of structural genre focus on the way the story is told. They explored the use of internal versus external conflict to tell a tale that is either plot-driven or character-driven. But with an anti-plot, that's not the case. It can't be, because there is no story as such to drive. There are no conventions or no plot points. There is no protagonist or antagonist. There is no definitive conflict or purpose. The anti-plot is exactly what it says on the label. There is no story because there is no plot. And perhaps that's why anti-plot is rarely seen in the professional industry. We have very few films or film scripts or novels or stories working along these lines. And what is seen even less is an anti-plot that works. So, what is the main focal point of an anti-plot? The main point that's worth noting is that the anti-plot lacks four of the main things that make a story a story: the conflict, the protagonist, a closed ending, and an endured change. Well, in an anti-plot, there is no set in stone protagonist, nothing finely chiseled or crafted. It might follow one person or a group of people more than others, but they can never be singled out as a protagonist in the same way as they are in other structural genres. In fact, the characters have free rein in this type of a narrative, which is an anti-plot. It's like a mishmash, a commentary that reader follows from point A to point B. And there's another thing. Those 2 points can be wherever the writer wants them to be. I mean, it doesn't really have to be at the climax and at the resolution. There is no cause for a linear structure, or for that matter, any kind of structure. The writer can do whatever they like, whenever they want to do it. I mean, if you want to skip your narrative suddenly to 20 years with no logical reason and clear-cut transition, well, who's stopping you? Go for it. On top of that, the characters don't have to endure any sort of change. They don't have to evolve with the circumstances. There is no conflict in this, remember? Therefore, they don't need to face any challenges or endure any kind of change that comes on. They just exist for the reader, and they are there to look in on. It can end wherever it wants to as well. There is no conflict as such to close. So the writer need not pay attention to the pacing or the ending at all. After having said all that, it sounds like paradise for a writer, doesn't it? You get to write whatever you want, however you want to write it. You don't have to worry about creating compelling conflict or painting a strong backstory for your main players. It could seem like every writer's dream, but then that's not the case. Like I did mention before, a good anti-plot is incredibly tough to pull off, and a great one is harder still. You might think that it sounds like a lot of fun, and that's because probably it would be. But then please remember, it is also very tough to do it correctly. It may be a fractured, jumbled mess that doesn't have any sort of meaningful structure or purpose. But then those are the very exact things that make it so difficult to shape. It is any narrative, I'm talking about the anti-plot, that plays with, subverts, parodizes, I repeat, parodies, satirizes, or otherwise deviates ironically from a given master plot. And when people base fiction on those things, or things of a similar nature, it cannot be reasonably justified with a typical story form. I mean, that becomes too much. And that's where anti-plots sweep down in all their glory. By using an anti-plot structure to paint those tales, a writer can avoid all of the intricate stuff and focus on the things that matter most. And all in a way that makes the reader know that the thing they are reading is based on commentary and not pure art. So please don't hold yourself back. If you want to do it, go ahead and explore. And after I have spoken about the anti-plot, most conventional narratives have an ending, a proper ending with a resolution where the conflict is resolved. But then again, like an anti-plot breaks away from the conventional structure, you have open endings also that break away from the conventional storytelling style. And how to go about writing a story with a great open ending. You see, when you write fiction, you may not always end with a scene or chapter that neatly wraps up the conflicts and the storylines. Instead, you may want to leave your readers with an open ending. An open-ended story is one in which the ending is left uncertain to one degree or another. The reader is not told all the answers and is left to figure them out on his own. And the writer should have 3 reasons for doing this. First, you want to leave room to write the sequel, or to rewrite the same story while approaching it from the point of view of another character. Second could be you simply want the reader to use their imagination or to determine what comes next. Third could be you force the reader to focus on other things. Sure, they may complain about a lack of a clean and concise ending, but once they get over that, they might focus on your themes and characters. So the open-ended story leaves the readers guessing. But while you attempt to do this, please bear in mind, please resolve the secondary conflicts and arcs so that there is at least some sense of resolution. Please don't mistake an open ending for letting the story just peter out. Even if there is no decisive conclusion, maintain the tension to the end. And then, most importantly, you must know your reason for leaving your story open-ended. If you accomplish nothing else by writing an open-ended story, you will at least generate conversation with the readers and audiences. One thing to keep in mind is that not every open ending is a good one, and it takes real writing skill to pull this technique off with successful results. So, how to go about writing a story with a great open ending? First, make sure your open ending is by design, something that you had in mind, you planned it. Ignoring elements in your plot and failing to deal with conflicts, or simply failing to write a proper ending to a story, is not the same thing as writing an open ending by design. If you write yourself into a corner and find that you cannot end your story cleanly, well, it's time to go back to the drawing board and chalk it out. Second thing, consider choosing just one character and only one subplot to leave unresolved. This is one technique you can use to select a single character that you develop into a compelling player. You can give them an interesting subplot that you do not tie up with your ending. Your readers will be eager to see what happens to that character next. You can use this curiosity to write your next story, or simply get your readers to discuss and share your story with another. And third thing is, please use your writing imagination to conjure up several viable endings. I mean, just because you haven't spoon-fed the ending to the audience, that doesn't mean that your story doesn't have an ending at all. That's not viable at all. If you are going to leave off the ending, or at least a part of it, you should have a very clear, solid idea of what it would be like if there had been an ending. So try creating several ending scenarios and then write your final chapter as an incomplete version of that. And in case you are planning to write a sequel, you will know exactly where to begin. To get into a better flow of writing stories with an open ending, I would advise you to read a few books that end with a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger is a classic way to end a book without tying up all the loose ends. The story ends with one of the primary characters stuck in a precarious position. This could be a physically vulnerable position, and so we have the term cliffhanger, they are left hanging on the cliff. Or it could be an emotionally vulnerable position. For example, the main character suddenly being told that another character is secretly in love with them. So, you will learn to see the difference between an open-ended story that leaves readers wanting more and one that simply makes readers feel as if they have been ripped off, and that shouldn't be the case. Then you could experiment with writing truly cold endings. I mean, what's a cold ending? You abruptly end the story resolving nothing. One of the best ways to do this is to end with a question that is never answered, an action that is never completed, or a statement that is only partially delivered, like the famous ending in Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. Tomorrow is another day. She thinks she can get back Rhett Butler, but does Rhett Butler come back to her? Now, the open-ended narrative, you mean that something is left unresolved, and this allows the audience to continue guessing and debating. And by leaving it unresolved, it can lead to social interaction. This is where people can communicate through various ways, such as social media, about the subject, which could continue debates long after they have read the story. Now, you will ask yourself this question, that after being told so much about open-ended stories, open-ended narratives, you think they'll work. Well, it's up to you. Leave open questions and create suspense like Margaret Mitchell did in Gone with the Wind. If you want to tickle your readers with suspense, cue an open ending. Okay, the Apaches are defeated, but will they be back again? Got it. The starship has escaped the pudding-like aliens, but will it ever make its way home to planet Earth? So that's really called a cliffhanger ending. These kind of endings will keep your readers on their toes and make them long for more. They're waiting for the next episode, the next sequence. But just a word of caution, if you overdo it, you could also end up not satisfying your readers. You see, the reader bought your story, he picked up your book so that he can hear from you what happened. And you are saying, just imagine the rest yourself. I mean, that could leave them very, very dissatisfied. But if you have delivered a great deal of action beforehand, and the question that you leave at the end is rather vague, then it might be worth it. Go ahead and try it. And so I wish you luck with trying these forms of storytelling, which are breaking away from the mainstream, which do not fall into the line of the traditional form of storytelling. And today it had to be anti-plot and open-ended narratives that I spoke to you about. I hope you found this useful. Happy writing till our next online class. This is your lecturer, counselor, friend, Kiran Misra signing off. Happy learning, happy writing.